It was an ordinary spring morning in Montana, the air crisp and still, until a sudden, low thud shook me from my routine. I stood at the kitchen counter, nursing my second cup of coffee, when I heard that sound, less like a knock and more like something heavy pressing against my door. My heart skipped a beat as I walked across the floorboards toward the front. When I threw open the door, I nearly stumbled back. There, looming on all fours, was a grizzly bear as tall as a 2-story fence, its fur plastered with mud and rain. I expected a roar or a snarl, but instead, its huge paws remained planted, and its chest rose and fell in slow, ragged gasps. Then I noticed the worst part. Its eyes, red, wet, and glassy, they held a depth of sorrow I'd never seen in any creature. And just like that, the bear was crying. I froze, instinct warring with instinct. Shotgun or flight or do something, but I didn't move. We just stood there, two strangers, sharing a moment neither knew how to navigate. Minutes passed, maybe seconds, before the bear resigned itself to the porch and sat down hard, the boards groaning under its weight. I backed away, phone in hand, remembering there was no service this time of year. As I watched it settle, defeated, I realized this wasn't a wild animal in anger or hunger. This was something else entirely, and somehow it had come to me for help. "What are you running from?" I rummaged in the pantry and grabbed a handful of jerky. Maybe it was foolish, but the thought crept in. Perhaps he came because he had nowhere else to go. I opened the door slowly and tossed the meat a few feet away. The bear glanced at it, then at me, and turned its head, refusing to eat. I slammed the door shut and spent the rest of the day in a haze of worry. Every creak of the floor sounded like an alarm. My dog Maggie, curled under the table, stayed unnervingly quiet, as if she too sensed this was no ordinary visit. When night fell, I turned off all the lights. Spring thaws in these parts knock out signals for days, so I couldn't check online or call anyone. Still, through the blind slits, I watched the bear lie on the porch, breath shallow, eyes closed, but twitching as if haunted. Sleep eluded me. Every floorboard groan sent adrenaline coursing. "Why here?" echoed through my mind until dawn's first pale light revealed the bear still motionless, as though he'd merged with the porch itself. By mid-morning, I forced down more coffee than is humanly advisable, eyes never leaving the porch. The bear shifted only twice, once to roll onto its side, again to sniff the air. Then around noon, I crept out to try again, this time with raw chicken. I dropped it at the porch's edge, but the bear's refusal was the same. As I stepped back, I noticed the old garden rake leaning against the shed. Gone. So was the rusted bucket I left there. Heart pounding, I circled the shed. But there were no broken branches, no drag marks. Just the bear unmindful of the world beyond the porch. Night came again, and I locked the doors, left a motion light by the back entrance, something I hadn't needed in months. Maggie paced the hallway, fur bristling, as if possessed by ghosts. At midnight, the light flicked on. My blood ran cold. Through the window, I saw a tall, thin shape drifting near the shed. No flashlight, no sound, just a shadow moving slow, gliding. It paused, and I felt its gaze. Then it vanished. Maggie growled softly. I held my breath until dawn. What else can hide in these woods? Morning brought another loss. My garden hose had disappeared. I crept outside, the bear watching me with inscrutable calm, then turned to inspect the soft ground around the shed. There, perfectly imprinted, were footprints, long, narrow, barefoot, with a strange drag at one side, as though something heavy was bound to one foot. The trail led into the timberline, vanishing at the creek's bank as if swallowed by the dark water. I followed for a while, heart hammering, but the tracks simply ended. Back on the porch, the grizzly remained where I'd left him. Maggie barked once. New behaviour, I thought. The forest was staging a scene I couldn't interpret, and I needed eyes in the woods. By evening, I'd returned from town with 2 trail cameras and extra batteries. One mounted on the back porch, pointed at the shed. The other tucked between pines overlooking the creek. I left a bucket of water and a slice of ham beside each, hoping to catch anything drawn to our strange tableau. If someone or something was out there, they might bite. Hours stretched into stillness, until, at exactly 2:17 a.m., the porch monitor flickered. A tall, dark shape, glided into view, paused, and turned to face the lens. No eyes, just an empty black form. Then it lifted an arm and waved, casually. My chest seized. I nearly screamed. Somewhere behind me, I heard the porch boards creak. The bear had stood. Maggie growled relentlessly. I watched the screen until static swallowed the image. When morning came, both buckets were empty, and the cameras showed nothing beyond the wave. Even the ham was gone. What are you testing? I whispered into the dawn air. That afternoon, I called Mark, the wildlife officer who'd patrolled these woods for decades. He arrived by noon, eyes narrowed at the porch. You feeding? He asked. No, I replied. He won't eat. Mark frowned. That's not normal. We sat on the creaking boards in silence, listening to the giant exhale of the bear and the wind threading through the pines. I've seen 3 cases this month, Mark said finally. Cougar, 2 black bears. They've been acting off, wandering to houses. Not reacting to dogs. He tapped ash from his cigarette. Something's messing with their instincts. Disease, poison, some plant toxin. My blood ran cold. I told him about the missing tools, the footprints, the wave. He didn't laugh. He just nodded. There's a stream down Deadwood Hollow, he said, voice low. Used to be clean. Now fish are dying. Might be dumped chemicals from old mining sites. He stood and handed me a small plastic bag containing a tarnished metal capsule found in a wolf carcass. No clue what this is, he said. Maybe it's why he came here, to you. 2 days later, Mark returned with a water test kit. We hiked upstream past the creek bend, through sapling pines, to a clearing that reeked of abandonment. There, under stripped poles and torn tarps, lay empty snare wires, half buried in leaves, 2 rusted cages, and a pile of raw meat packs stamped with foreign labels. Heavy-duty antibiotics. My stomach turned. Poacher camp, Mark said quietly, snappy photos. We found 3 carcasses nearby. A fox, a raccoon, and some other small animal. All foam-flecked. No wounds, as if poisoned. Near a charred fire pit, I unearthed a mud-caked notebook. Pages were damp, scrawled with weights, species lists, and one final line. Leaving tonight. I showed it to Mark. He tightened his jaw. This wasn't hunting, he said. They were feeding them doses, testing something. And maybe it made them vulnerable. That afternoon, I found a bear at the creek's edge, drinking. He lifted his muzzle as I approached, water dripping, then took a few slow steps toward me, barely closing the distance, and stopped, waiting. His eyes held a patient plea. I knew I needed to act. But first he did something surprising. A wild boar charged from the woods, snorting rage. I froze until the grizzly launched himself at hog, knocking it aside in a clash of tusks and claws. When it ran, the bear stood guard, chest heaving. He turned that fierce gaze on me, acknowledged me, then ambled back to the creek. He's protecting me now. Word spread fast. By week's end, every rancher and reporter in the county knew of Joe the Bear. Calls came from neighbours, from the sheriff's office, demanding I appear at a public hearing on the bear living on Joe's property. In the dusty county hall, Sheriff Nolan opened the floor, warning of public safety risks. A rancher in a red cap ranted that the bear was a time bomb to be put down. Then a rescue advocate insisted the bear's approach was desperation, not aggression. Disputes echoed until Nolan turned to me. What does Joe think? I stepped up. I'm no expert, I began, voice steady. But this bear hasn't attacked, hasn't destroyed a thing. He came here wounded and alone. The room fell silent. If you fear him, that's on you. But I've seen more humanity in his eyes than I've seen in ours. That evening, on a local radio call-in, I pressed the same point. Perhaps the true problem is not the bear, but our view of the wild, as something to fence off or fear. They come to us for a reason. Spring burst through in full colour the following week, buds unfurling and birds returning. But one morning before sunrise, I poured my coffee and saw the yard empty. No paw prints, no breath on the porch, only silence. I stood, longing for his massive silhouette to reappear. But he never did. Maggie seemed calmer, sleeping by the door. Yet in the hush, I felt an echo of his presence. I fashioned a sign from an old board. He is not the enemy. And I planted it at the forest's edge where he used to sit. Days later, I found a bouquet of wildflowers at its base. No note, just petals. Someone understood. Exactly 1 week after he left, Maggie alerted me to tiny paw prints at the tree line. Smaller, lighter. I followed them a few feet into the woods. Where they faded, No footprints beyond. I waited, heart full, imagining a new cub, or perhaps a raccoon, or maybe a piece of him left behind. In the quiet that followed, I realised the world felt friendlier, wilder, and more ours than ever. Sometimes I sit on the porch in the morning light, Maggie at my feet, and I remember, maybe we're not the ones saving wildlife. Maybe it's the other way around. Why did you come to my door? And in that question lies the real story.